By the early 1950s, television had really made profound inroads in the motion picture industry, where it showed the most, the bottom line, the finances.
Average attendance was 50% of what it had been in 1948. Television was mostly responsible for that.
People were staying home. They weren't going to movies. The studios knew they had to do something to lure those people away from their living rooms, so movies became bigger. That's the operative word, bigger. Bigger in budget, with spectacles like The Robe and The Ten Commandments, that sort of thing, and also bigger in size. In 1953, with The Robe, the first film in CinemaScope, movies got twice as wide as they had ever been before.
With CinemaScope, the movies changed forever. The secret behind CinemaScope, since it used a conventional 35mm film, in getting a wider picture was the use of an anamorphic lens. And this is an early CinemaScope adapter lens that squeezed a wide picture onto the conventional 35mm film.
If you took a circle and filmed it in CinemaScope, it was an oval, and the information was squeezed at the ratio of 2 to 1.
Anamorphic projection lenses were used that expanded the picture back out to its normal dimensions. So when CinemaScope came into being, audiences saw a picture that wasn't 1.33 to 1, they saw 2.55 to 1. During the 1950s, more and more processes were developed, which not only gave us wide screens, but better clarity and color. Todd AO was the response to Cinerama, which had predated CinemaScope by about a year. It tried to duplicate the same image that the 3-camera Cinerama process did. Mike Todd was the main instigator of the Cinerama Corporation. Todd stepped out.
He didn't feel that he could reach a large audience with it, so he broke away from Cinerama and went on his own.
Todd felt that Cinerama was too bulky. The 3 cameras, did a marvelous job of recording a big image, but it was unwieldy and it was expensive. And those damn seams just couldn't be hidden well enough. Todd sold his stock, had a lot of money, and decided he was going to produce Todd AO, where everything comes out of one hole.
We went up to Rochester, where American Optical Company was situated. Brian O'Brien was the principal advisor and scientist developing their lenses. And Dad did one of his sales job and brought Brian O'Brien down to see Cinerama, and then said, surely you can do this out of one lens. You don't need this patched together process with the seams. And of course, O'Brien said, of course I can do it.
Todd AO was what we call a spherical system, no squeezing or manipulation of the image. And in order to record all of the information, we used the wide film, 65mm.
The Todd AO 65mm film was then printed to 70mm stock, and the picture size was 5 perforations versus 4 for conventional 35mm. So we had a picture that was not only substantially wider, but also 20% taller.
It was more than triple what one was accustomed to seeing in 35mm, even CinemaScope.
In order to achieve a flicker-free image on the screen, the American Optical people decided to increase the frame rate from the normal 24 that had been the standard since the advent of sound up to 30 frames per second.
The 30-frame system was part of Todd AO for 2 good reasons. The one reason was 30 frames is beyond the flicker threshold. If you look at 24 frames, that's why we called movies flicks, because they flickered. So it smooths out the action at 30 frames, and it also totally eliminates flicker.
Todd AO was a deeply curved screen that required a lot of work on the part of the engineers to be able to bend that picture around the audience.
The idea of a curved screen was to try to surround the audience with the motion picture display.
The concept behind Todd AO was to duplicate the field of vision that a human being has.
If we go back to how human binocular vision performs, you've got 2 eyes, You're seeing between 160 and almost 180 degrees.
Todd AO was 128 degrees, which is still very, very wide. And that deeply curved screen produced a very visceral "you are there" effect that, if you were really lucky, you'd almost lose your lunch. Projection rooms were in booths that were at ceiling height. A lot of fire codes demanded that the projectors be mounted at such a location. This provided a pretty steep downward angle for the projectors, and when you shine a picture on a curved screen from a high angle, you end up with a curved image that doesn't match the curved screen. And it was up then to the Todd AO engineers to find a way to fix this. They could either move the projectors down to shoot head onto the screen, if that was possible, or they could create a specially corrected print. This is a sample of a 70mm print designed to correct for the distortion from a high projection angle. You'll see that the film itself has already got a pre-bent image. You can see the curvature of the image, which would be straightened out when shown on the wide curved screen. Also, you can see the soundtracks. Todd AO carried 6 tracks of magnetic sound, 5 behind the screen, and then a 6th track that fed speakers throughout the auditorium, versus CinemaScope that used 3 tracks behind the screen and a single track to fill the surround speakers.
It was good sound, but it wasn't as good as the Todd AO sound, but it was most impressive. And it could be installed in just about any theater.
With CinemaScope, you could use regular movie projectors to run the movies and have the special lens and, of course, the wider screen. With Todd AO, you needed new equipment.
Every nut and bolt had to be created afresh. Nothing that had been common with the old 35mm system could be used. Mike Todd knew that if his new system was going to be a success, it had to have a dynamite opening production. And for years, Hollywood had tried to get Rodgers and Hammerstein to sell the film rights to their most popular production at that time, which was Oklahoma. After showing Rodgers and Hammerstein some test footage of what Todd AO can do, they got excited about the process. They made their production available and became partners in Magna Corporation, which was the owner of Todd AO. Without a surefire hit, they knew they were going to be in trouble. Oklahoma provided the hit they needed.
I got a beautiful feeling, everything's going my way.
At the time that Oklahoma was released, the producer wanted the film to be road shown in Todd AO.
The road show was very nearly the same price as legitimate theater. Mike Todd felt that the legitimate theater was what he had grown up in and wanted to emulate with his movies. He didn't even call them movies. They were shows. You dressed up, you put on a shirt and tie. Your lady had her best dress on and heels, and it was quite an event and a fun thing to attend. And you spent a lot of money.
Motion picture theaters were going to have Todd AO, and they wanted to make Oklahoma available to as many theaters as possible.
To get the most money out of Oklahoma, the film had to be shown in conventional theaters as well as in their converted Todd AO theaters. So a 35mm version in CinemaScope was made. The film was shot in both Todd AO at 30 frames per second and simultaneously in CinemaScope at 24 frames per second.
They would shoot the same scene in tandem, CinemaScope and then Todd AO, and then CinemaScope and Todd AO.
You're almost shooting 2 complete films. It's not like you've got your 2 cameras side by side and just shooting it twice. It has to actually be photographed and staged, once for one camera and once for the other camera. Anyone that is comparing the 2 versions of Oklahoma, Todd AO versus CinemaScope, will first see that the opening titles are completely different. In Todd AO, we have a black background with our lettering, and then we open up on a cornfield. In the CinemaScope version, our titles are over a live background, and we don't start out with the cornfield scene that the Todd AO version has. This rather imposing lens is the first of the Todd AO bug-eye lenses, and it took in a field of 128 degrees. CinemaScope, while it had a very wide picture, didn't actually have very many wide-angle lenses. 50 degrees may have been the widest that CinemaScope would cover at that time. You had to try to get the images for both systems as close as you could, which may explain why there are not as many really wide-angle shots in the production of Oklahoma in the Todd AO version that there might have otherwise been. The film itself didn't incorporate a lot of the "you are there" visceral type of effects that the Todd AO system could give you, and that Mike Todd had very, very much hoped to have in the system. So a short subject was added to the playbill of Oklahoma called The Miracle of Todd AO, and it included flying over the mountains, going through the canals of Venice, and certainly a roller coaster ride. Mike Todd wanted to make movies look as good as they possibly could. What he created was pretty substantial, and in many cases, we're still celebrating what Mike Todd did to this very day. He set a lot of trends that we're still living with.
Widescreen and a truly realistic presentation were all due to the vision of CinemaScope and Mike Todd and then the competitors that followed.